You know when you're just like driving down the highway and that little check engine light suddenly pops on your dashboard?
Oh, yeah. The worst feeling.
Right. But, I mean, there is a very basic expectation of reality there. You take the car to a mechanic, they plug in their little diagnostic tool, and they read the code.
Right. They point right at a specific part and say, hey, there is the problem.
Exactly. Objective reality dictates that the sensor is either reading a fault or it isn't. But when you step into the world of navigating a relationship with a highly toxic person,
Especially a narcissist.
yes, specifically a narcissist, that fundamental expectation of reality just completely shatters.
It really does.
Suddenly, your dashboard is flashing all sorts of terrifying warning lights, but the person sitting in the passenger seat is just calmly, relentlessly trying to convince you that those lights aren't real,
Yeah, they insist that you're actually losing your mind for even seeing them.
which leaves you feeling entirely untethered from your own sanity. I mean, it's terrifying.
That phenomenon is the absolute definition of psychological muddy waters. And, clearing that water is the entire mission of today's deep dive.
Yes, which I'm so glad we're doing.
Yeah.
Because dealing with a toxic person usually just makes you feel like you are going crazy.
Right. We are extracting concrete survival tactics from Frank Vasquez's recent work, specifically his segment on how to protect yourself from a narcissist.
And what I love about Vasquez is that he makes it so actionable.
Exactly. We often treat narcissism as this, abstract, highly clinical psychological concept, something debated behind closed doors in academic papers.
Right, but he translates it into everyday armor.
He really does. He grounds this entirely in reality by answering real questions from real people. We're talking about dealing with parents, romantic partners, bosses, people who just drain your life force.
So let's get into it, because the first step in building that armor, it requires us to look inward, which is incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh, totally. Because before you can even begin to protect yourself, you have to actually realize you are under attack.
Right. And Vasquez points out this devastating irony right out of the gate. He says, it is usually your absolute best traits that keep you stuck in the firing line.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Because, he was addressing a question from Alyssa in Phoenix, Arizona, and he explains that the very first step is you have to stop downplaying the behavior.
Right. There's this common misconception that people get trapped in these toxic dynamics because they're somehow weak, or submissive.
But Vasquez flips that script entirely.
He really does. He says people don't get trapped because they are weak. They get trapped because they care.
Wow.
They have high levels of empathy. They love deeply. And, to factor in the brutal pragmatism of real life, they often have intense structural ties to this toxic person.
Like financial ties.
Exactly. They depend on them financially, or they share kids, or maybe they're locked into a career under their management.
Right. And that structural and emotional investment, that is the soil where hope grows. And in this specific context, hope can actually be incredibly dangerous.
It's the empathy trap. Because of that investment, you hold on to this desperate fantasy that things will miraculously get better.
So you start doing the narcissist job for them.
Exactly. You downplay the behavior in your own mind.
You tell yourself,
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe I am overreacting, or, they're just under a lot of stress at work.
Or the classic, they didn't really mean it the way it sounded.
Right. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain the relationship forces you to excuse the inexcusable.
Which brings us right back to your check engine light analogy.
Yeah, you just stare at the dashboard, the engine is practically smoking, and you keep telling yourself, oh, it's just a glitch. The car's just having a bad day.
But Vasquez draws a very hard, distinct line here, and this is crucial. The line between a simple misunderstanding and a toxic pattern.
Right, because a misunderstanding happens occasionally. Two healthy people miscommunicate, feelings get hurt, they apologize, and the behavior adjusts.
Exactly. But a pattern is when someone constantly dismisses your feelings. They constantly twist reality, shift the blame onto your shoulders, and emotionally drain you month after month.
So a bad day is just an event. Narcissism is a weather system.
I love that. Yes. And by ignoring the pattern, you are just letting the engine destroy itself.
So acknowledging that weather system before you get completely broken by it is essential. Protection begins with clear sight.
You have to actively stop making excuses, both in your own mind and to your friends and family. Stop making excuses for the person who is actively harming you.
Because the pattern alters your baseline reality so slowly that you don't even realize how much toxicity you've normalized.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've identified the toxic pattern. We've stopped making excuses. But, I mean, acknowledging the abuse creates a terrifying new danger, right?
Confronting them.
Confronting someone who fundamentally thrives on conflict. How do you actually stop the harm without detonating a bomb?
Right, because addressing bad behavior with a reasonable person usually leads to a productive conversation.
But with a narcissist, it usually leads to a 5-hour circular argument where you end up apologizing for even bringing it up.
It's exhausting, and Vasquez tackles this when answering Mateo from Cordoba, Argentina. His advice here is brilliant, but incredibly counterintuitive.
Say less, not more.
Say less, not more.
Which is so hard, because the instinct for a highly empathetic person is to over-explain.
Always. You think, if I can just find the perfect combination of words, if I can just articulate my pain clearly enough, they will finally understand and change.
But they don't, do they?
No. Vasquez points out that narcissists are fundamentally opportunistic communicators.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they do not listen to understand, they listen to gather ammunition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The more words you give them, the more material they have to twist, to redirect, to play semantics with. They will deny things until you are left emotionally exhausted and completely confused.
So over-explaining just feeds them.
Exactly. So he provides a toolkit of incredibly short, concrete phrases to use instead. Like just saying no. Just the word no as a complete sentence.
Yes. Or, that doesn't work for me.
I'm not discussing this right now.
I need some space.
And then there's one that completely stopped me in my tracks. Vasquez suggests saying, I remember it differently.
That's a powerful one.
Now, I gotta push back on that one for a second, because if I put myself in the shoes of someone dealing with a highly volatile personality, someone who compulsively twists reality,
Right.
isn't saying, I remember it differently, basically calling them a liar to their face. Won't that just provoke a massive fight? I mean, isn't that just throwing a match into a pool of gasoline?
That is the exact fear that keeps people over-explaining.
Right.
But the underlying mechanism there requires a shift in perspective.
Okay, how so?
Vasquez's philosophy here is critical. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is not to convince them of your truth.
Because you can't.
Exactly, because they are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. Their reality is fixed. Those short phrases aren't designed to be rude or confrontational.
They are a tactical maneuver to refuse a circular argument.
So the insight here is that with a toxic person, your silence is actually your highest currency. The moment you start over-explaining, you are actively funding their manipulation.
Take that a step further. By saying, I remember it differently, and deliberately refusing to elaborate, you are refusing to engage in their shared hallucination. You're not handing over your emotional state for them to play with. You're finding your stance, planting your feet, and finding your voice without giving them any surface area to attack.
Because your sole mission in that exact moment is just to find a reason or simply an excuse to get away so the act of harm stops.
It's not about winning the debate. It's about exiting the arena entirely.
Okay, so you deploy those short phrases, you stop over-explaining, but let's say the toxic person simply plows right over your words.
Which we know happens constantly.
Right. Which brings us to the true definition of a boundary. Vasquez drops a heavy truth here while responding to Danielle from Atlanta, Georgia. He says the only boundaries that work are the ones you're actually prepared to keep.
Because a boundary isn't just something you say.
Yeah, saying, please don't speak to me that way is completely useless if you just stand there in the room and let them continue speaking to you that way.
Exactly. A boundary isn't a request. It's an action. It is something you live by.
Right, and he gives these really vivid examples, like dealing with a narcissistic parent, which is often the most deeply entrenched dynamic.
Oh, absolutely.
So say you visit this parent, and the minute you walk in the door, they constantly criticize you. Your weight, your career, how you raise your kids.
And you try being polite, you try changing the subject.
You try explaining how much their words hurt you, and absolutely nothing changes.
So Vasquez says the real lived boundary here is shortening the visit.
Right. You stop volunteering personal information, and the second the toxic pattern starts, you physically stand up and leave.
He even suggests writing a letter to explain why you won't be visiting anymore if the comments continue.
Writing a letter. That feels so formal.
It does, but the mechanism of the letter is brilliant because asynchronous communication cuts off their ability to use real-time manipulation. As Vasquez notes, they cannot argue with a piece of paper.
That is so true. It removes the emotional feedback loop they rely on.
You just hand them the condition. If there is no initiative for basic respect, I am not coming back. And if they don't change, you don't go back.
And it is crucial to recognize that this isn't cruelty. Society conditions us to feel immense guilt for cutting off family, but this is emotional self-preservation.
Yes, you are preserving your own mental integrity. Do not make guilt the compass for every decision you make, or you will waste your life serving the wrong people.
He also gives an example of a new romantic partner.
Right. The early red flags.
Yeah. Say a new partner suddenly starts checking your phone, demanding to know your whereabouts, and questioning your timing. They inevitably wrap this behavior up in the language of love or, like, protective concern.
But healthy love and concern require time and deep emotional investment to build. Early on, that behavior is simply control wearing a disguise.
Exactly. So your boundary in that situation isn't asking them nicely to respect your privacy.
No, your boundary is refusing to share the location, taking your phone back, and ending the date if they push the issue.
It's like a boundary isn't just a line of yellow caution tape they can duck under. It has to be a brick wall. And you build it by physically removing your time, your access, and your energy.
But here's the thing. Building that brick wall creates a new physical reality. It cuts off their oxygen.
Yeah.
And that predictably leads to a massive escalation.
Right, the backlash. Building that airtight seal sounds incredibly empowering in theory, but anyone who has survived this knows that narcissists absolutely hate walls. They suffocate in a vacuum.
Enforcing a boundary almost always makes things much, much worse before it ever gets better.
Priya from Mumbai, India, asked about exactly this. Because when you finally get grounded and cut off that supply of emotional reactions, they go into pure panic mode.
The escalation happens because a firm boundary exposes the exact reality the toxic person is desperately trying to avoid facing.
Which is that they are not in charge.
Exactly. They do not own your mind, your time, your emotions, or your choices. When faced with that loss of control, the backlash is severe.
So they might argue with terrifying intensity, or lay on catastrophic guilt trips.
Or suddenly play the victim to mutual friends.
Or punish you with the silent treatment. But the most insidious reaction Vasquez mentions, the one that truly messes with your head, is when they suddenly become extra charming again to try and regain control.
Oh, that phase is a nightmare.
Think about how incredibly disorienting that is. You finally stand up for yourself, you endure the screaming match, you enforce the boundary.
And the next day, they act like the perfect, loving partner or the most supportive parent.
They buy gifts, they speak softly. It immediately tricks your brain into thinking, oh no, maybe I really was the problem. Look how nice they are. Maybe my boundary caused all this unnecessary drama.
That reaction is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. It relies on the biological trap of intermittent reinforcement.
Like a slot machine.
Exactly like a slot machine. When you enforce a boundary and they rage at you, your brain is flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone. You are in fight or flight mode.
Right.
Then suddenly they flip the switch to extreme charm, the tension breaks, and your brain is flooded with a massive relieving spike of dopamine.
Wow. So it's chemical.
Yes, that chemical roller coaster bonds you to them. It is a neurochemical action, not just a behavioral quirk. But Vasquez offers the ultimate paradigm shift to cut through that chemical fog.
I love this part. He says the boundary did not create the problem. The boundary revealed it.
The boundary did not create the problem. The boundary revealed it. It is so powerful.
I want everyone listening to just pause and let that sink in. It completely absolves you of the immense guilt they are projecting onto you. Your refusal to be abused is not the cause of the abuse. But, I mean, if boundaries simply act as a spotlight, revealing the deep-seated problem, it leaves you staring down the ultimate agonizing question.
The one everyone trapped in these dynamics eventually has to ask.
Will this person ever actually change? Sophia from Toronto, Canada asked this, and Vasquez doesn't sugarcoat his answer.
No, he calls it one of the hardest truths a human being has to face. The stark reality is that in the vast majority of cases, they do not change.
And the psychology behind why is vital to understand, right?
Yes. Change requires self-reflection and accountability. Narcissists fundamentally do not believe they are ever wrong.
Right.
Furthermore, the current abusive setup benefits them immensely. It caters to their ego and shields them from vulnerability. Why would they dismantle a system that serves them so well?
So even if they promise to change, usually during that dopamine-flooded charming phase, it is almost always a temporary manipulation.
Deployed strictly because they sense they are losing access to your energy.
He brings it back to the workplace to show how universally this applies. Say you have a boss who constantly humiliates staff in meetings and takes credit for your work.
And reacts to the mildest feedback with vindictive rage.
Exactly. You keep holding out hope that sheer professionalism or HR or just time will fix the dynamic. But month after month, you just feel smaller. You become hyper-vigilant.
You're exhausted before you even log in.
And inevitably, that exhaustion bleeds into your home life. You start snapping at your kids or withdrawing from your partner.
Vasquez's advice here is brutally practical. You have to evaluate your core self-worth versus the paycheck.
Right. You need to map out an exit strategy and find a new job before the clinical depression sets in.
Because your body is keeping the score. You already have enough natural stress in life. You cannot volunteer to absorb someone else's manufactured toxicity.
And the dynamic is identical in romantic relationships. They might apologize beautifully, with tears in their eyes after every catastrophic blow-up. But Vasquez says, watch the behavior, not the performance.
The fundamental disrespect continues. The script changes, the promises sound incredibly sincere, but the pattern, that crucial pattern we talked about at the beginning, remains exactly the same.
Vasquez uses some incredibly evocative imagery here that just perfectly captures the dynamic. He says protecting yourself means refusing to burn yourself to keep that person warm.
Oh, that's so good.
Right. Refusing to sleep on the floor just to keep someone else comfortable. You have to really examine the sacrifices you're making. Are you setting yourself on fire just so they don't have to experience the mild chill of accountability?
It really requires a fundamental rewiring of your internal dialogue. For years, your brain has been asking the wrong question. You've been asking, how do I get them to understand my point of view?
But they won't.
Exactly. They are incapable of it. You have to pivot and start asking, what is this relationship actually doing to me?
Look at the evidence of your own life. Are you growing or are you shrinking to avoid conflict?
Because without the foundation of basic respect, there is simply no relationship, professional, familial, or romantic, worth fighting for.
So let's lock in the essential survival tools we've extracted from Vasquez's work today. First, cultivate ruthless, honest self-awareness. Stop doing their job for them by downplaying the bad behavior.
Second, build airtight seals, not just verbal requests. Lived boundaries are enforced with action, not just words.
Third, protect your psychological currency by refusing to over-explain yourself or get dragged into exhausting circular arguments. Less is always more.
And finally, trust the absolute truth of what a person's repeated behavior teaches you over the hollow comfort of their empty apologies.
And hold on to the fact that these tactics apply across the board, whether it's a parent, a romantic partner, or a boss.
You do not need to prove the validity of your pain to the person causing it. You do not need to suffer beyond reason to earn the right to walk away.
And you absolutely do not need to beg another human being for basic respect.
Never.
Vasquez teased that his next segment covers the fallout, like how narcissists react when they are finally fully exposed and your temporary silence turns into permanent distance.
That's going to be a fascinating one.
Oh, for sure. But building on the psychological mechanics we've unpacked today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the vacuum we discussed. If a toxic person's entire sense of control, their entire illusion of supremacy and power, relies completely on provoking emotional reactions from you.
Right.
What happens to their own identity when you, and eventually everyone else around them, finally walk away and give them absolutely nothing to react to?
Wow. It exposes the ultimate fragility of their existence. Because without an audience, the performance just ceases to exist.
Exactly. It's like realizing that the terrifying monster sitting in the passenger seat only has power as long as you keep feeding it your panic.
So true.
You don't have to keep driving the car while the engine destroys itself. You are allowed to pull over, take the keys, get out, and just walk away. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep learning how to protect your peace, and above all else, trust your reality.